Hello, John McAdams here. Thanks a lot for joining me in this video where I talk about the new 7mm precision rifle cartridge and how it stacks up against the tried and true 7mm Remington Magnum. Both are great cartridges and there is tremendous overlap in their capabilities. I see the 7mm PRC as a more modern and refined 7mm Magnum, and that cartridge does have some advantages in some areas. But I think the 7 Rem Mag has an advantage in other areas. I'm going to go into those things in detail in this episode. Now, I have used the 7mm PRC extensively over the past 3 years, both at the range and afield. I am aware of the velocity issues with the cartridge right now. I'll talk a little bit about that in this episode, and those shortcomings do inform my analysis. Furthermore, I am currently on a mission to successfully use as many 7mm PRC factory loads afield on animals as possible. I'm about halfway there at this point. I'll share details on how all those different loads I have used performed on game afield in this episode too. So let's get started talking about how these two cartridges stack up next to each other in the real world. I'll start out by talking briefly about the history and design characteristics of these two rounds. So the 7 Rem Mag came along during the modern Magnum era after World War II. Winchester introduced a line of new belted Magnum cartridges that utilized a modified 375 H&H case that included the 264 Win Mag, the 300 Win Mag, 338 Win Mag, and 458 Win Mag in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Remington followed suit with a cartridge of their own that followed the same playbook in 1962, the 7mm Remington Magnum. Just like the name states, Remington loaded their new cartridge with .284 caliber bullets. Like the Win Mags, the 7mm Remington Magnum cartridge used a 2.5-inch long case and also fit into a standard length or 30-06 length action. Furthermore, the 7 Rem Mag was rolled out at the same time as the now legendary Remington Model 700 rifles. Remington offered two loads initially for their new cartridge: a 150 grain core lock at 3,100 feet per second, and a 175 grain core lock at 2,860 feet per second. The 7 Rem Mag did well right out of the gate. That cartridge shot 150 grain bullets faster and flatter than 150s from a 270, and it shot 175 grain bullets faster and flatter than 180 grain bullets from a 30-06. The cartridge is still around today and is easily the most popular 7mm cartridge in the world. And when I say popular, I mean popular with a capital P. Everybody makes guns and ammo for it right now, or at least it seems that way. For instance, Nosler makes a load with a 160 grain Accubon advertised at exactly 3,000 feet per second. They also make a load with a 140 grain Accubon at 3,125. Remington still offers that 150 grain core lock. 3,110 is what they advertise a velocity for with it now. They also offer that 175 grain core lock at about 2,860 feet per second. Winchester offers a really sleek load with a 168 grain Accubon long range at 2,900 feet per second. Those are far from the only 7 Rem Mag hunting loads available either, but you get the idea. Now, the 7 Rem Mag was the 7mm Magnum for a long time, until Hornady made an attempt to dethrone the 7 Mag in late 2022 when they announced their own 7mm round, the 7mm Precision Rifle cartridge. Now, like they did with the 6.5 and 300 PRC, the folks at Hornady built the 7mm PRC using a modified 375 Ruger case. The 375 Ruger was designed with the same .532-inch case head diameter as the 375 H&H. However, unlike the 375 H&H, the 375 Ruger is a beltless cartridge with minimal taper, so the actual body of the 375 Ruger case is larger in diameter than that of the 375 H&H. This results in a slight increase in case capacity for the 375 Ruger while still working in a standard Magnum bolt face. Furthermore, Hornady designed the 7mm PRC to fire heavier bullets with an insanely high ballistic coefficient at a muzzle velocity very close to 3,000 feet per second. Plus, they also incorporated many of the so-called modern cartridge design principles Outdoor Life shooting editor John Snow and I discussed in a recent interview. Episode 366 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast, if you want to check it out. That improved the overall accuracy potential of the new cartridge. Typical advertised loads for the 7 PRC fire a high BC lead core 175 or 180 grain bullet at 3,000 feet per second, or a 160 grain copper bullet at the same velocity. Yes, I know there's some controversy regarding those velocity figures. I will discuss that in more detail shortly. Now let's talk about the relative sizes of these two rounds in more detail. First, the 7mm PRC is a little bit longer overall than the 7 Mag, 3.34 inches versus 3.29 inches. But both are so-called standard length rifle cartridges. They fit in a 30-06 length action. They both also utilize a Magnum bolt face. Now, even though the 7 PRC is longer overall, the 7 Rem Mag has a slightly longer case length, 2.5 inches versus 2.28 inches. This results in more head height for the 7mm PRC, which means it has more room outside the case to accommodate really long, sleek, high BC bullets without intruding into the powder column while still staying within SAMI specs. That plays into bullet weight, which we'll discuss shortly. Now, the 7 Rem Mag uses a belted case while the 7 PRC has a beltless case. Furthermore, though both use a Magnum bolt face, it's important to note the actual case diameter of the 7mm PRC, 0.533 inches, is larger than the non-belted portion of the 7mm Rem Mag case, 0.513 inches. Add it all up, and the 7 Rem Mag actually has a little bit more powder capacity than the 7mm PRC. I measured the case capacity of 5 pieces of fired Hornady brass for each cartridge, so that's about a 4% difference in favor of the 7 Rem Mag. That will vary a little bit with different manufacturers, but you get the idea. Both cartridges use the same 0.284-inch diameter bullet, but bullet weight is another important difference between them. Most 7 Rem Mag factory loads shoot bullets in the 139 to 175 grain range. 140, 150, 160, 175 grain bullets are most common for that cartridge. The 7 PRC most often uses bullets in the 150 to 180 grain range. In particular, like I mentioned earlier, it was designed to use high BC 160 grain monometal or 175 and 180 grain lead core bullets. It's important to note the 7mm Rem Mag isn't optimized for performance with those long, sleek, high BC bullets, and the 175 grain bullets the 7 Mag typically uses in factory loads aren't the same as the 175 grain bullets often offered in the 7 PRC. Most 175 grain loadings for the 7 Rem Mag use shorter and lower BC pointed soft point or round nose bullets like 175 grain core lock, power shock, and Federal Fusion bullets, and the trophy bonded bear claw. Those bullets aren't as long or sleek as something like 175 grain Accubon long range or ELDX. High BC bullets for the 7 Rem Mag tend to top out with stuff like 162 grain ELDX, 168 grain Berger Hybrid Hunter, or the 168 grain Accubon long range. Things are similar with copper bullets. Since copper is less dense than lead, those bullets usually top out around 150 grains for the 7 Rem Mag. For instance, Barnes makes 140 grain and 150 grain TTSX factory loads for the 7 Rem Mag. Hornady also offers a factory load with a 150 grain CX bullet for the cartridge. All of those bullets have a polymer tip on them. Barnes does make a 160 grain TSX loading for the cartridge, but that bullet does not have that polymer tip on it, and it has a lower BC. The really sleek, stretched out Barnes LRX tops out at a 139 grain factory load for the 7 Rem Mag, while Barnes and Hornady both make 160 grain LRX and CX bullets respectively, with similar profiles and higher BCs for the 7 PRC. Now, yes, it is possible for hand loaders to use heavier and higher BC bullets in the 7 Rem Mag, but the cartridge is not optimized for use with bullets like that. Performance can be uneven, and sometimes getting them to shoot well takes some work. That's why factory loads for the cartridge all have those lighter bullets in them. So why is there a difference in bullet weights between these two cartridges? Well, there are two reasons: rifling twist rate and head height. You need a faster twist rate to stabilize those longer bullets. The 7 Rem Mag has a SAMI spec rifling twist rate of 1 in 9.5 inches. That's just fine for typical factory loads in that chambering, but it's not quite fast enough for the really high BC stuff. On the other hand, the 7 PRC has a faster SAMI specified twist rate of 1 in 8 inches. Additionally, the greater head height of the 7mm PRC gives that cartridge more space to use a really long, high BC bullet that still fits in a standard length rifle action and magazine without requiring the bullet to be seated so deeply into the case that it intrudes into the powder column. All right, one last difference between the two cartridges before we move on to ballistics. The 7mm PRC is loaded to a higher SAMI maximum average pressure of 65,000 psi versus 61,000 psi for the 7 Rem Mag. Okay, that's all well and good, John. What's this mean in the real world? Add it all up, all other things being equal, the 7 PRC is capable of shooting the exact same bullet 100 to 200 feet per second faster than the 7 Rem Mag. The 7mm PRC also can shoot a heavier and higher BC bullet at a similar or slightly faster velocity than the 7mm Rem Mag can shoot a lighter bullet. This is the more common approach most companies are taking with their factory ammo. Now let's talk about ballistics. This is a good point to acknowledge and briefly discuss the fact that the 7mm PRC often falls short of advertised velocities. I was one of the first people to publicly investigate this in 2024, and I made a specific episode where I discussed this in detail. Link is in the episode description. Check it out to hear all the details, but long story short, Hornady ammo is often falling 100 to 200 feet per second short of advertised velocities, especially with the 175 ELDX. So in this comparison with the 7 Rem Mag, I will use real-world 7mm PRC muzzle velocity data I obtained out of my rifle with a 22-inch long barrel using Hornady and Barnes factory loads. Your mileage may vary, but remember, those are both velocities I actually observed at the range with a 22-inch long barrel for both loads. That's 138 feet per second and 119 feet per second slower than advertised velocities, respectively. Now, I will also provide ballistic data for that 175 grain ELDX at 3,000 feet per second. That's what Hornady advertises with this round. True, they're not achieving that velocity as I record this, but as you will learn if you check out that episode where I investigate 7 PRC velocities in detail, Federal offers a factory load with that exact bullet that actually achieves that velocity out of a 24-inch long barrel, or it gets very close to it with a 22-inch long barrel. I have seen it with my own eyes. And like I mentioned, I will also include the Barnes 160 grain LRX load for the 7 PRC, once again with actual and advertised velocities. And I will compare them to Hornady Precision Hunter and Barnes Vortex long range load for the 7 Rem Mag. The 139 LRX gets off to a hot start with that fast muzzle velocity, but it slows down quickly due to its lower BC. It is the flattest of these 6 loads out to 400 yards, but then it starts to fall behind. The ELDX loads all do great, but there starts to be a divergence in performance with the fast versus slow 7 PRC loads out to 400 yards. It gets worse as the range increases. Now, the 7 PRC is more powerful, but that gap between the two cartridges is smaller when you compare the 7 Rem Mag to the slower 7 PRC load. Now, just for argument's sake, if we set 1,800 feet per second as an absolute minimum desired impact velocity for bullet expansion, the fast 7 PRC ELDX load has roughly 100 additional yards of effective range compared to the 162 ELDX. The fast 160 grain 7 PRC load hits that threshold at 900 yards. The 139 grain LRX hits that threshold at 710 yards. If you take those hits to velocity into account, for the 7 PRC, the slow 175 grain ELDX hits that threshold at 880 yards, which is the same as the 7 Rem Mag with the lighter 162 grain ELDX. The slow 160 grain LRX hits that threshold at 820 yards. And if we're being honest here, those ranges are all much farther downrange than what most people have any business shooting. So even those slower 7 PRC loads will still expand at a much longer range than the vast majority of hunters have any business shooting. In terms of kinetic energy, at 500 yards, the fast 7 PRC ELDX load has about 15% more energy than the comparable 7 Rem Mag load. The slow 7 PRC load only has about 4% more retained kinetic energy at that range. The 160 grain LRX load, the fast one, has about 30% more kinetic energy than the 139 grain LRX at that same range. That drops to about 19% more for the slower 160 grain LRX. If you extend the range out to 800 yards, that fast 7PRC ELDX load has about 20% more retained energy. That drops to a 7% advantage with the slow 175 grain ELDX. Trajectories are surprisingly similar here, though. Both fast 7PRC loads either have a small advantage or are nearly the same as that of the 7 Rem Mag ELDX load. That flips to a small advantage for the 7 Rem Mag versus the slow 7mm PRC loads. That's not a significant difference either way, though, especially for someone with a laser rangefinder, a ballistic app, an adjustable turret on their scope. A minor difference in trajectory just doesn't mean much these days. If we look at wind deflection, we see the 7 PRC does have an edge over the 7 Rem Mag, even with those slower loads. The fast ELDX load has less than a foot of wind deflection at 500 yards. That is outstanding. But even those slower loads are still doing well here. Same with the 7 Rem Mag. Those faster 7 PRC loads have about an 11% advantage for the ELDX loads and a 38% advantage for the LRX loads at 500 yards. That drops to about a 4% advantage for the ELDX and a 30% advantage for the LRX when we compare the slow loads at that same range. At 800 yards, the fast ELDX load has a 13% advantage, and the fast LRX load has a 44% advantage. Compare the slower loads, that drops to a 5% advantage for the ELDX and 35% for the LRX. Assuming the same wind conditions, wind deflection is dependent on bullet velocity and BC. For this reason, the 7 PRC load firing the super high BC 175 grain ELDX comes out on top here. Same for that 160 grain LRX versus the 139 grain LRX. Just like with trajectory and retained energy, the gap narrows with the slower 7 PRC loads, but it still does pretty well here. But the 7mm PRC does great with that federal ammo that actually achieves close to advertised velocity. In that case, you're looking at, say, a 10 to 15% improvement over the 7 Rem Mag in wind deflection and retained energy. So the big takeaways so far are those relatively higher BC bullets do offset the disadvantages of the slower 7 PRC loads, but the cartridge does take a hit in performance relative to the 7 Rem Mag with those slower loads. Part of this is just because the 7 Rem Mag is so darn good itself. But remember, this is assuming perfect performance for the 7 Rem Mag. Depending on your rifle, you might or might not get that, and the gap in performance favoring the 7mm PRC could very well be a little better than this in real life if you have a slower 7 Rem Mag load, which happens from time to time. And it's also worth mentioning that there's not a gigantic difference in performance between any of these loads inside 400 yards either. We'll talk more about that in a second. Now let's talk about recoil, though. The 7 Rem Mag does come out on top in the recoil department when you compare those ELDX loads for each cartridge. I pulled bullets from a couple cartridges from the Hornady Precision Hunter factory loads for both cartridges. I weighed the powder contained in each cartridge, calculated recoil for a 7-pound rifle. 8-pound rifle. The 7mm PRC has about 18% more free recoil energy than the 7 Rem Mag. That more or less matches up with my experiences shooting both of them. I think the 7 PRC is a very shootable cartridge, but the 7 Rem Mag just recoils less. Now let's talk about barrel life. On average, when dealing with barrels of similar quality that are used and maintained in a similar manner, the 7 Rem Mag will have a longer barrel life than the 7 PRC. Both cartridges have the same bore diameter, but the 7 PRC runs at a slightly higher pressure and typically uses more powder. For these reasons, barrel life will, on average, be shorter. Jaden Quinlan from Hornady estimated an average of 12 to 1,600 rounds of barrel life for a 7 Rem Mag and 1,000 to 1,200 rounds for the 7 PRC in a recent spreadsheet they published. Both cartridges are somewhat rough on barrels and will have shorter lives than milder cartridges, but 1,000 plus rounds is still a substantial barrel life for someone primarily using these cartridges for hunting. What about accuracy? Like I mentioned earlier, Hornady implemented some design principles with the 7 PRC to help optimize accuracy. Once again, for more details, check out Big Game Hunting Podcast episode 366, where John Snow and I discuss this in depth. Long story short, though, cartridges with a long neck for adequate neck tension on long, high BC bullets that have a steep shoulder for head spacing, a fat case with minimal body taper, and a snug freebore diameter are all conducive to good accuracy. The 7PRC has all those characteristics. There will be individual exceptions, but on average, the 7mm precision rifle cartridge will likely be more accurate than the 7 Rem Mag when using factory rifles and ammunition. That has also been my observation shooting both cartridges at the range from several different rifles. So how does all of this stuff play into actually hitting a target, or if we're hunting, an animal downrange? The 7PRC has two general advantages here. One, you have a small advantage in accuracy on average. Two, the cartridge has slightly better ballistics, especially in terms of wind performance. Now, a perfect shooter will always estimate the wind direction and velocity exactly correct. They'll always get the right range with their rangefinder. They'll do everything exactly right to hit that target. But we're not perfect. Even the best shooters make mistakes. And a cartridge that performs better in the wind, for example, will help alleviate errors the shooter makes in estimating the direction and velocity of the wind to a certain extent. To that end, I ran some simulations using Brian Litz's Weapon Employment Zone tool. I did a WES analysis with it. First, I ran a simulation calculating hit probabilities for the 7 Rem Mag ELDX and the fast and slow 7PRC ELDX loads on an 8-inch diameter circle at 400 yards. So we'll call that the size of a deer's vitals. I ran the simulation using the same variables for both cartridges using the same BC and muzzle velocity I mentioned earlier. When I ran the simulation, I observed a 1 to 2% increase in hit probability going from the 7 Rem Mag to the slow 7PRC load with comparable accuracy levels. That widened to about a 4% increase in hit probability going from the 7 Rem Mag to the fast 7PRC on that simulated deer's vitals at 400 yards. Now, remember, that's assuming the same accuracy for both cartridges. That gap increases to about an 8% increase and a nearly 11% increase in hit probability for the slow and fast 7PRC loads over the 7 Rem Mag if we also assume an increase in accuracy. If we extend the range to 600 yards and increase the size of the target to one approximating the size of an elk's vitals, we see about a 2% increase in hit probability going from the 7 Rem Mag to the slow 7 PRC loads, once again with comparable accuracy levels. That goes to about a 5% increase in hit probability going from the 7 Rem Mag to the fast 7 PRC. That gap widens to about a 4 to 5% improvement and a nearly 8% improvement in hit probability for the slow and fast 7 PRC loads over the 7 Rem Mag if we also assume that increase in accuracy. Now, the details vary a lot in simulations like this. They depend a lot on the actual environmental conditions and the assumptions we make about the shooter's ability to accurately read the environmental conditions and adjust for them appropriately. But yes, we do see a small boost in hit probability for a shooter with the same skill level going from the 7 Rem Mag to the 7 PRC when it comes to battling environmental conditions. Now, it's also important to realize that does not mean you can just go out and buy a 7 PRC and magically kill everything either. The 7 Rem Mag also does pretty darn well in this area too, especially if you have a rifle that is especially accurate. And finally, before we move on, this simulation also shows how difficult it can be to score a first-round hit on the vitals of game at 400 to 600 yards, to say nothing of a shot at even longer range. So like I said, 7PRC certainly has an advantage here. It is a small one, but it's up to you to decide if that additional capability and increase in hit probability is worth it for you. Now, I can hear somebody saying right now, John, I have a custom 7 Rem Mag rifle with the magazine, chamber, barrel, all set up to shoot my custom hand loads, shooting those exact same high BC bullets the 7 PRC uses. I'm also loading them a little hot, so they're going darn near as fast as the 7 PRC factory loads too, and my rifle shoots them super accurately. Well, congratulations, that's great. You turned your 7 Rem Mag into a 7 PRC. Sure, it still says 7 Rem Mag on the barrel and on your brass head stamp, and you're getting most, if not all, of the advantages of the 7 PRC. But it took a lot of work for you to get there, and you applied most of those modern cartridge design principles the 7 PRC uses to get to that point with your 7 Rem Mag. And that way of doing things ignores the 7 Rem Mag advantage with factory ammo. More on this in a second. Or you can just skip all that hassle and get an off-the-shelf 7 PRC rifle and use factory ammo and get what I think is some of the best potential for accuracy available today using factory rifles and ammunition for a 7mm Magnum. Now let's talk about ammo availability. The 7mm PRC is super popular. Lots of ammo companies have picked it up in the last couple of years, but it still can't hold a candle to the 7 Rem Mag in terms of availability. So first, I'll list all the current 7mm PRC factory ammo offerings. Hornady currently offers 3 loads for the cartridge, an offering in their match line with a 180 ELD match, an offering in their outfitter line with 160 grain CX, and an offering in the Precision Hunter line 175 grain ELDX. Federal recently started making 7 PRC ammo in their premium, tip fusion, and terminal ascent lines using the 175 grain ELDX, 175 grain tip fusion, 155 grain terminal ascent, and 170 grain terminal ascent. Remington has also announced a load in their new Premier long range, copper tipped, and tipped core lock lines with 175 grain spear impact, 160 grain copper tipped, 175 grain core lock tip bullets as well. Nosler offers 7 PRC ammo in their trophy grade long range line with 175 grain Accubond long range. They also offer loads with a 160 grain ballistic tip and Accubond for the cartridge too. Norma recently announced they're offering it in their Bond Strike line with a 165 grain bonded polymer tip bullet. Weatherby also has a couple loads for it too, with a 150 grain Swift Sirocco, 175 grain Berger Elite Hunter, 177 grain Hammer custom bullets. Barnes, of course, also makes that Vortex long-range load with 160 grain LRX. That's a pretty impressive selection of factory ammo for a cartridge that just celebrated its 3rd birthday. As impressive as that is, though, there's an even better selection of 7 Rem Mag ammo. Virtually all those 7 PRC loads I just listed are available for the 7 Rem Mag too. Furthermore, a couple of other companies that haven't jumped on the 7 PRC train yet, like Browning, Winchester, and Swift, all make 7 Rem Mag ammo. Furthermore, 7 Rem Mag ammo is on average less expensive than the 7 PRC too. In that vein, there are also no so-called budget loads for the 7 PRC right now. There's no Federal Power Shock, no Winchester PowerPoint, no regular core lock, no regular fusion loads for it. I just looked before I recorded this. You can get a box of 7 Rem Mag ammo by Seller and Balat with plain old soft point bullets for less than $25 a box. Norma Whitetail ammo is more expensive, but still just over $30 a box. PPU ammo, Hornady Whitetail, Federal Power Shock ammo, all available for less than $40 a box on Midway for the 7 Rem Mag. The cheapest 7 PRC stuff I can find is the Hornady loads. They all go for over $50 a box on Midway right now. I have not shot every single 7 PRC factory load yet, but I've shot the majority of them. Current production ammo is almost universally slower than advertised. Hornady has caught a lot of flack, but they're not the only one guilty of publishing, let's just say, optimistic muzzle velocities for the cartridge. The Federal Premium ELDX and the Federal Terminal Ascent loads I have found are almost dead on with their advertised muzzle velocities. But even the Federal Tipped Fusion is slow. Same thing with the Nosler ammo I've shot with 175 grain Accubond long range, and the Barnes ammo, and the Weatherby ammo with a hammer bullet. All were 1 to 200 feet per second slower than advertised. On the other hand, the 7 Rem Mag seems to be delivering velocities much closer to advertised right now. The 7 Rem Mag is not perfect. You will find some stuff, some ammo, some rifles that just shoot a little bit slower. But on average, you're going to be closer to what is advertised with the 7 Rem Mag than the 7 PRC. So that's one more point in favor of the 7 Rem Mag. Now, I mentioned earlier I've done a lot of hunting with a wide variety of 7PRC factory loads. So I'll talk briefly about some of my experience hunting with those different loads before we move on. So first, I took Hornady Outfitter ammo with 160 grain CX bullets to Africa in 2023. I shot Impala and Blue Wildebeest with them. Shots were all relatively short, and that's why I selected that tough CX bullet to begin with. Performance was excellent. All the bullets exited. The Impala went the farthest, but only 25-30 yards. It literally blew pieces of his lung out the other side when the bullet exited. I also shot a mule deer with that ammo at 330 yards. He dropped instantly at the shot. I shot a black buck with 175 grain ELDX from the Hornady Precision Hunter line early 2024. Once again, he dropped instantly. That was a strongly quartering two-shot that punched through the shoulder muscle and bone, the ribs, the entire chest cavity, and exited in front of the offside hip. That was a very close range, very high velocity impact. Meat loss was substantial, but I wanted to observe penetration from that bullet under those circumstances. The bullet did not blow up like some people claim it will. And like I said, it even exited and it scrambled his vitals. I shot a very nice axis deer later that spring with the 175 grain Accubon long range loading. That was a high shoulder shot at about 160 yards. The buck dropped instantly, completely wrecked his vitals. I also shot a cow moose in Colorado in late 2024 with a 170 grain terminal ascent bullet. That was about a 135 yard shot. As is common with moose, she stayed on her feet for a few seconds after the first shot, so I fired again. Both shots hit on her right shoulder, but at different angles. There was nearly a volleyball-sized wound to the right lung where both bullets hit initially. Both bullets exited the moose and left smaller but still sizable wounds, one in the front of the left lung, one in the rear of the left lung. The moose tipped over about 20 seconds after the first shot. I also shot a feral hog with Federal's new 175 grain tipped fusion load. Range was about 35 yards. I was hunting in thick timber out here in East Texas where I live. I was hunting with a Pulsar Thermion 2 thermal mounted on my Bergara Sierra rifle early in the morning before the sun came up. This hog was acting suspicious, and from his body language, it appeared as though he was about to leave. Now, his entire body was behind a big tree, and he just had his head sticking out, so I shot him just behind the ear. That shot dropped the hog instantly in his tracks. The bullet left a nickel-sized exit wound in the offside of his neck. I shot that hog again in the chest while he was on the ground, both for insurance and to further test terminal performance. That bullet punched a hole a little bit smaller than my fist in the near side of his rib cage, turned both of his lungs into absolute jello. The bullet did exit the offside, so I did not recover it. I actually have not recovered a single 7mm PRC bullet from any animal. I weighed that hog afterwards, and he weighed 195 pounds on the hoof. So he was a big but not gigantic animal. All right, now we'll talk about rifles. Now, the situation with rifles with these two cartridges is similar to the ammo situation, but the gap between them is smaller in terms of availability. Hornady did a great job getting rifle companies to pick up the 7PRC. There are lots of 7PRC rifle options out there. You can get rifles from Bergara, Browning, CVA, Christensen Arms, Fierce Firearms, GA Precision, Gunworks, Hill Country Rifles, Mossberg, Proof Research, Remington, Ruger, Savage, Seekins Precision, Springfield Armory, and Weatherby. And I think that's all of them, but I might have missed a company or two. Like I mentioned earlier, I have a Christensen Arms Ridgeline FFT and a Bergara Sierra in 7PRC. Both of those rifles are actually left-handed, too. Most notably, you might have noticed Tikka and Winchester are absent from that list of 7PRC rifles. I think some 7PRC rifles are coming from Tikka soon, and that would leave Winchester as the main rifle manufacturer not making anything in 7PRC. But Winchester, and I think every single one of those other companies, make 7 Rem Mag rifles. Almost every popular bolt-action centerfire rifle in current production is available in 7mm Remington Magnum. So there's a lot of options for the 7PRC, same with the 7 Rem Mag. Okay, so with all that said, which one is right for you? Like I mentioned earlier, I see the 7mm PRC as a refinement of the 7mm Magnum concept. There's no animal I wouldn't hunt with a 7 Rem Mag that I would hunt with the 7mm PRC. But there are some situations where I think that 7 PRC does have some advantages. For instance, the 7 PRC, even with those slower factory loads, does have that edge over the 7 Rem Mag in terms of performance in the wind. Those faster 7 PRC factory loads have an even bigger advantage in the wind. They're also a little flatter shooting. They also have just a little bit more retained energy and velocity downrange than even the slower 7 PRC loads, which also have that advantage over the 7 Rem Mag, just not in the trajectory department for the slower stuff. Sometimes those advantages matter, sometimes they don't, but they do become more important as the range increases. The same is also true with the accuracy advantage the 7 PRC has over the 7 Rem Mag with factory ammo and rifles. All of the different ammo types I've shot in the 7 PRC, and like I said, I've used most of them, have all shot very well, even the loads that fell short in the speed department. Furthermore, if you prefer to have a shorter barrel for your hunting situation, the 7 PRC is the better option of these two cartridges. Most hunters don't really need the capabilities of the 7 PRC. However, a person with the right shooting skills who wanted to extend their effective range and want assistance in battling challenging environmental conditions would be well served by a 7 PRC. So those are the 7 PRC benefits. Now let's talk about those for the 7 Rem Mag. One, you got a much better selection of ammo and better prices on ammo. Ammo is also more likely to live up to advertised performance. Similar deal with rifles, but not as big of an advantage for the 7 Rem Mag. You also get a little bit longer barrel life. The cartridge also just recoils a little bit less too. It's also still plenty powerful for most situations. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I have killed deer, a couple different exotics, a couple different species of African plains game, and a moose with the 7 PRC. I haven't killed a black bear or an elk with the 7 PRC yet, but I think it would be awesome on them as well. And you could take the 7 Rem Mag and put it into this exact same category of game. Everything from deer up to and including moose. So the 7 Rem Mag still has a lot to offer hunters too. Of the two, I personally prefer the 7 PRC. That doesn't mean I think the 7 Rem Mag is bad. Like I said, I just think the 7 PRC is a little bit better. And I think that is where the future is too. Not that I think the 7 Rem Mag will die anytime soon. I think the powder situation will eventually get resolved for the 7 PRC, and it will be achieving the performance it is capable of in the near future. I also think it's just a more modern cartridge design that does everything the 7 Rem Mag can do, but with those few refinements. I would not necessarily recommend someone switch to a 7 PRC if they already have a 7 Rem Mag they really like. However, I would certainly steer a person towards a 7mm PRC over the 7 Rem Mag if they were starting fresh and wanted a new 7mm Magnum of some sort. You are, of course, welcome to disagree with me here. That's just how I feel and how I think. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel right now and hit that like button. Just click on the thumbs up button and the red subscribe button below the video to make sure you don't miss out on any of my future episodes. I've also put links below the video to articles I've written about some of my favorite pieces of hunting gear like slings, ear protection, and scopes. And for more detailed information on popular hunting cartridges and what they are best suited for, click on the link in the description below or go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/ebook. Sign up there to get a free ebook I have written on the best hunting calibers. Now I'm going to turn it over to you. What do you think about these two rounds? Have you hunted with either the 7mm PRC or the 7 Rem Mag? What game have you successfully taken with them? What ammo and rifle did you use in each case? Let me know by leaving a comment on this video right now. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a great day and good hunting.